Hello everyone, welcome back to Talking History. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you're all keeping well. My name's Liz and on this channel you know what I do by now. So for anyone new watching, hi, welcome. You're very, very welcome. Come and join us. So we're building up nicely, and I am not an historian. I am just someone who is extremely passionate about history, and I love to share all of my passion with you. So last week I covered the story of Matilda of Boulogne, and if you haven't seen that, I will link that up there or down there for you to watch. But for this week, I would like to try and make sense of the whole anarchy, if I can. I know it can be a little bit confusing at times, so that's why I'd like to do this video today, to help try and make sense of the whole thing and why it was called the anarchy, even though it was the Cousins' War. And so it's going to be all of that. But don't worry, a video on Empress Matilda will be coming. I have a few more videos to come before I enter the Plantagenets, and I can't wait for that. But I am excited for the Tudors. Anyway, so yeah, if you want to know more about the anarchy, please stay where you are. The anarchy was a period in English history that was one of the darkest periods in English history. This is during the 12th century. And it was a cousins' war. It was a war between cousins Stephen and Matilda. So the anarchy was a period of civil war in England between 1135 and 1153, following the death of King Henry I of England. Now, in the anonymous 12th century, the deeds of Stephen, it gives a picture of the kind of state England was in at that time. So, quote, England, formerly the seat of justice, the habitation of peace, the height of piety, the mirror of religion, became thereafter a home of perversity, a haunt of strife, a training ground of disorder, and a teacher of every kind of rebellion. Now, the anarchy would be looked back on as one of the darkest period in all of English history for centuries to come. That's even throughout the whole Black Death, everything. This was one of the darkest periods. So what led up to the whole anarchy? In 1120, Henry I's only legitimate son and heir, William Adelin, died on the White Ship disaster. Now, we all know that Henry had many children. He had at least 22 illegitimate children, what we know of. Now, because they were illegitimate, they technically didn't really have the right to the throne, even though they was half Henry's. But anyway. So before all of this, Henry's rule had been seen a strong one with a centralized government. So all of this went on the death of William Adelin. So Henry became worried for the succession. So he decided to remarry, and he married Adeliza of Louvain, who was 35 years his junior. They married in 1121. Now, unfortunately, Henry's second marriage had remained childless, and in 1125, Henry's only legitimate child, his daughter Matilda, was widowed when her husband, the Holy Roman Emperor Henry V, died. So Matilda returned to Henry's court, and he gave Matilda a little bit of breathing time, a little bit of time to grieve. And then he swiftly had her married to the 15-year-old Geoffrey of Anjou. Now, Geoffrey was heir to the French lands of Anjou, Touraine, and Maine. Now, their alliance had secured Normandy's southern borders, which benefited Henry, not so much Matilda. So Henry named his daughter Matilda as his successor, and he made his court swear an oath to follow his daughter as rightful queen. Now, the decision wasn't overly popular, and there was many reluctant nobles, but they eventually agreed to support Matilda. Now, it wasn't only the fact that Matilda was a woman that bothered the nobility. It was also the fact that Matilda had spent very little time in England, which wasn't her fault. Her father had her married off to the Holy Roman Emperor when she was 9 years old. She lived in Germany until he died, so she was only here for a little bit. And then he had her married off to Geoffrey of Anjou, so she lived in Normandy. It's not her fault. So it was also the fact that her new husband, Geoffrey of Anjou, wasn't very popular among the English nobility, as he was technically at war with Henry when Henry died. And as I said, because Matilda was female, people were suspicious. Dare I say, downright scared to have a woman rule. They had never had a reigning queen before. So in King Henry's final years, his relationship with Matilda and Geoffrey had become strained. They were arguing a lot. Matilda had been promised several castles in Normandy as part of her dowry through marrying Geoffrey. But she wasn't told when she could take possession of those castles. So in 1135, Matilda and Geoffrey demanded those castles. And they insisted for the Norman nobility to swear their allegiance to them. But possibly out of fear that Geoffrey would try to seize power in Normandy, Henry refused to give those castles. So a rebellion broke out, and both Matilda and Geoffrey sided with the Normandy rebels than her own father. Then King Henry died in December 1135. Now, some of those nobles who swore that oath to support Matilda declared that they no longer needed to keep that oath because Henry's died. Henry's dead now, so we don't need to keep up with that oath. Now, in Normandy, on Henry's death, a few of the Norman barons believed that Theobald of Blois, I can't pronounce that name, Henry's nephew through his sister Adela, would be the ideal choice as the next King of England. But Theobald's younger brother had other ideas. Stephen was a prominent and very well liked member of Henry's court. He was a favourite of Henry's. And through his younger brother, also Henry, Bishop of Winchester, he had the support of the church. So Stephen wasted no time in crossing the channel to England from Boulogne. Boulogne was a much closer to England than Normandy was, and he seized the crown of England for himself, being proclaimed King of England on the 22nd of December 1135. Now, Matilda, she didn't cross to England straight away. It took a while for news to reach her that Stephen had actually seized the throne for himself. And there is a whole thing, why didn't Matilda cross straight away? Why didn't she go straight away and get the crown? It was the fact that Matilda was in later stages of pregnancy, and this was her third pregnancy. Now, during her second pregnancy, she had a very, very difficult time. And because she was in later stages of pregnancy, it wasn't safe for her to travel to England. So she needed to stay where she was, otherwise, she and her unborn child would be at risk. So Matilda was in Normandy, but she refused to renounce. Well, technically, she was in Rouen, but it's a part of Normandy. But Matilda refused to renounce the crown, and her claim was upheld by her half brother Robert of Gloucester and her maternal uncle, King David I of Scotland. Now, Robert's declaration for supporting Matilda had caused a rebellion to rise up across the southwest of England and Kent. Now, Geoffrey of Anjou invaded Normandy and King David attacked northern England. King David invaded England on Stephen's ascension to the throne, as he recognised his niece Matilda as the rightful heir. I think I'm trying to talk too quick, and so Stephen's only way that he could diffuse the whole situation with David was to give David Carlisle and give his son, David's son, the title and lands of the earldom of Huntingdon. So over the next few years, David continued to invade northern England, and this was in the whole support to support Matilda's cause, but also to increase David's own territory. So he was having the advantage there as well. So it all ended at the Battle of the Standard, and it was a victory for Stephen. But David had received much of the territorial concessions that he wanted, and that was also including the earldom of Northumberland, and he kept hold of Carlisle and Cumberland. Now, David, he did remain loyal to his niece throughout Stephen's reign, but he didn't take his army south again in support. Matilda arrived in England to claim her throne in 1139, and she arrived in England with her half-brother, Robert of Gloucester, by her side. Now, she stayed at Arundel Castle with her stepmother Adeliza. Now, Adeliza, after the death of Henry, she remarried and she had several children. And if you would like me to do Adeliza's story, then please do write it in the comments down below and I will get that done. So Matilda stayed at Arundel Castle. She was having a good old catch up with her stepmother because they was close in age and they always been relatively quite close. So, and Robert, I'm doing so well. Robert, he continued on and to rally up support for Matilda, and he went on to Bristol. Now, Stephen, he had been informed that Matilda had arrived in England and she was at Arundel Castle. So Stephen besieged Arundel Castle, effectively trapping Matilda and her stepmother inside. But because Matilda hadn't yet declared herself as a threat to Stephen, and because Stephen was all about chivalry and good things and everything, he let Matilda go. He allowed her safe passage to Bristol, where she could meet up with Robert. And once there, she established a base for herself in Southwest, and there were a few minor fisticuffs here and there. There was a few, Stephen's better than Matilda. No, Matilda's better than Stephen. Oh, no. There was a few of that here and there. And Stephen even made an attempt to make peace when he tried to reclaim the region, but nothing happened of it. So we all know it's the Cousins' War, but why was it called the Anarchy? So as Stephen's rule progressed, he was alienating many of the nobles who had once been key advisors to Henry, and he was promoting his own friends, he was promoting his own people. Now, Stephen had Roger, Bishop of Salisbury, arrested, and with that, he immediately made an enemy of the church. And Stephen's position as king was becoming unstable. Many members of the clergy had seen the arrest of Roger as a personal attack on the church itself. So now they threw their support at Matilda. Now, many barons and clergy had become a law unto themselves, and the authority was breaking down. Stephen's government was completely losing control. It was seen as total anarchy. Excuse me. So unlicensed castles were popping up here and there, and number of nobles wanted to retain what they saw as their hereditary rights to the land that was changed during the hands of Henry's reign. Now, those nobles would be constantly changing sides to how it gained their whether they gained advantage. If they gained more being on Stephen's side, they support Stephen. If they gained more being on Matilda's side, they support Matilda. So they was constantly going back and forth. But Matilda did actually come close to claiming the throne for herself in 1141. Stephen had besieged Lincoln Castle, but he was set upon by forces led by Robert of Gloucester and his son-in-law, Ranulph of Chester. Now, Stephen was defeated and he was taken to Bristol, being held prisoner for nearly 9 months. The King of England had his legs reportedly chained, and it was reported that he was treated poorly, and this had lessened Matilda's popularity. So with her cousin behind bars, Matilda took her chance to become queen. She made her way to Westminster. She had preparations made for her coronation, but she was quickly losing support. She was losing support as quick as almost as she got support, and she was losing support from the people of London. But this was for a whole other reason. Matilda was seen as, dare I say, high maintenance, and she was quite self-indulgent, and traditionally a soon-to-be monarch, in the lead up to their coronation, they would listen to petitions about tax concessions and requests for favors and just doing good things for the people. But Matilda had all petitioners banished and from her presence, and she refused to grant any favors. She raised taxes, which was an immediate no. And so Matilda was now being seen as a no better solution for the country than what was happening already. So Matilda was forced out of London by an angry mob, and she was forced to flee to Oxford. Then in September 1141, Matilda's ally, Robert of Gloucester, was captured at Winchester by Stephen's wife, Queen Matilda, who was leading loyal nobles and Flemish mercenaries in Stephen's name. Now, just a side note, Queen Matilda, I like Queen Matilda. I done a video on her last week and I really admired her. But she was doing the exact same thing that Empress Matilda was doing. She was raising armies. She was trying to secure the crown, but because she was doing it in Stephen's name, she was doing it for the royal. She was seen as doing great things. She was seen as a remarkable woman for doing all of that for King Stephen. Whereas Empress Matilda was doing the exact same thing, raising armies, trying to get her crown. But because she was doing it for her own right, her own birthright, she was seen as the bad guy. How does that make sense? Anyway, so Robert was captured. Matilda needed Robert. So she had Stephen released in exchange for Robert's release. And King Stephen, who was now released, he proceeded to make an attack on Oxford, and he besieged the castle, where Empress Matilda was forced to make a daring escape. And she fled to Abingdon Abbey and then on to Wallingford Castle. So the war continued, and there was defeats and victories on each side, but neither Matilda or Stephen's forces were able to deliver one decisive blow to end the whole thing. But then in 1147, that decisive blow came all on its own, when Robert of Gloucester died, and with him the main thrust of Matilda's military supporting campaign. So Matilda left. She returned to Normandy, and the following year she passed her rightful claim to the English throne, to her teenage son, Henry. And the Civil War still wasn't over, but Henry Plantagenet, or Henry of Anjou, was about to make his move. Henry had enjoyed military success in Normandy, and he had set his sights on England. And in 1153, Henry led an effective campaign where he managed to take control of most of the country with very little fighting. Now, the first signs of a resolution appeared at Wallingford in July 1153, when Stephen and Henry's forces were camped on either side of the Thames, and the barons on each side had refused to fight. Many had already made peace amongst themselves. They wanted the whole anarchy to end. Stephen and Henry was also urged to do the same thing. And there were a few fisticuffs here and there, there are still a few going, oh, no, we're still keeping fine. But then most of it kind of ironed itself out, as it were. But Stephen's son Eustace wasn't happy with the idea of a truce, because he was saying that now was his birthright. What Henry was trying to take was his birthright. So he tried to raise an army and everything else against it all, but suddenly, out of nowhere, Eustace died. He just apparently he had a fit and he died. It just came out of nowhere, and that was all what was told about him. He died in August 1153. And then from there, things were made a lot more clearer on who the claimants to the throne were. And this led to a formal agreement of the Treaty of Winchester. And this treaty allowed Stephen to continue to reign as king until his death. And with his death in October. I had a complete mind blank. In 1154, Henry of Anjou, or Henry Plantagenet, became King Henry II of England. He claimed the throne, he made it, he got his mother's birthright as the rightful heir. And with Henry became the new ruling dynasty of England. The Plantagenets would rule England until 1485. And we know how that ended. So Henry, he united a kingdom that had been torn apart by the total anarchy, and the economy was in tatters. Now, due to a long period of fighting, Henry had dismissed the Scottish and Welsh invaders who had taken advantage of the anarchy. And most importantly, he actually listened to the advice of his barons. Now, something that Stephen didn't do so well. So there we are. I hope I've made sense of the anarchy. I know it's a little bit confusing at times, but whose side were you on? I'd be intrigued to know. Where's you for Stephen? Did you think Stephen done well, or was you for Matilda and Henry? Now, Henry II is now seen as one of the greatest kings of all time. And I cannot wait to do a video on Henry. I think I might have to do a couple of videos on Henry, actually, which I don't mind about. I don't mind talking about the Plantagenets because there's a lead up to the Tudors. And I just, in case you're not aware, I am a fan of the Tudors. I do love the Tudors. But in the whole lot of history, everything in history, you just couldn't make it up. You really couldn't. It's just, for me, everything is fascinating. I find the whole thing fascinating. It's one of those things, I love history, but I wouldn't want to live in it. I'm happy where I am now, if that makes sense. But anyway, I'm going to stop rambling because I could ramble on for a very, very long time. So I'm going to stop here, and like I said, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching. Please do like and subscribe and share and keep being amazing, because you are all amazing, and thank you for all of your continued support. It really means a lot, and thank you. There you go. So enjoy the rest of your day, look after yourselves, and I will be back soon with another video.